My name is Steve Shepelwich. I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, based out of our Oklahoma City office. Now, we've asked who knows about the benefits cliffs and who knows about the tool. Who knows about the Federal Reserve? Okay, a couple of you. What do you think of when you think of the Federal Reserve?
Money.
Money, okay. Usually the very first question is, what's going to happen with interest rates, right? Every 6 weeks we come out and say something about interest rates, especially these days. And I was told when I signed on this job 18 years ago, I could talk about anything I want, as long as I say it's my own, my own message and not that of the Federal Reserve, but I could not talk about interest rates. So that's off the table. The second question we get then after that is, well, if you're not talking about interest rates, why are you here? Why does the Federal Reserve care about workforce development, care about low-income individuals? Well, briefly, the overall mission of the Federal Reserve is to have a strong and stable economy for the U.S. And we believe for that to happen, everybody must be able to participate in the economy as well as benefit from it. So back in the early 80s, our community development mission was established. And so each of the 12 Federal Reserves across the country has this focus on community development initiatives for low and moderate income individuals. And there's a huge overlap between that and the clients that you serve. And in our work, we work in a number of different areas, including digital inclusion, access to financial services, small business development, and workforce development programs. I have a colleague in Denver that covers all of Colorado for all of those programs. And I'm based in Oklahoma City, and I lead our workforce development programs for our area. So that's what brings us here, and that's what brought the Federal Reserve to working with the state of Colorado around these tools. Now, we saw a show of hands of folks that know about the benefits cliffs. Anybody have an example you want to throw out of a benefits cliff? Or an issue that you've dealt with a client? Any quick example that comes to mind?
Well, there's one happening in Denver where the minimum wage is going to go up, and so a lot of people who get the minimum wage bump are going to no longer be eligible for benefits, so they're going to actually have a negative impact financially.
Okay.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example. Minimum wage goes up, they may lose more benefits than they gained in that increased income. Any other examples, other thoughts? Yeah.
Now I'm working with a job seeker who is getting CCAP, Child Care Assistance Program, and he's offered a job, I think, for like $17 an hour. But if he takes that, then he's no longer eligible for CCAP and he can't afford child care.
Okay.
On that kind of a wage.
Great. Okay, another example and another type of benefit that's out there. I came across this issue early in my career. I remember it clearly as 1996. I was working with a very small credit union in Delaware. I was going around to public housing residences trying to open up checking and savings accounts with folks, right? And I talked to this one woman and she said, you know, I would love to open an account and I have enough money to do it, I should do it. But if I open up a checking and savings account with your credit union, they'll know how much money I have and I'll get kicked out, right? She had her cash in a box under the bed and she knew that that would raise problems. And kind of since then, all those years, you know, I've always known benefits cliffs is a problem. We all know it's a problem. And usually, you know, when you're on the front lines counseling folks, it's just sort of like it's the environment. It's the air we breathe. It's something you just got to work around. You can't do anything about it really, right? You just take it as a given. Well, about 2 years ago, I came across the work that the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta was doing around these tools, and I was stunned because it was very practical, hands-on tools that can be applied on the front line with clients and engagements, as well as to change policy. And it's doing both of those. And so over this last year and a half, I've been working with the Atlanta Fed and our 7 states in this area on developing partnerships and pilots to see how this can be implemented. And that's what brought us to Colorado. About a year and a half ago, we established a partnership with the Workforce Council of Colorado to implement this program in 3 workforce boards. Arapahoe Douglas Works, exclamation point, right, works. And then also Pueblo and Northwest areas. And so we've been working over this year and a half to see how does this fit in, what can we do with it. And we're getting closer and closer to going prime time and working with a broader group of folks. I think there's something like 90 partnerships going on around the country, getting a lot of great learnings. And it's being used everywhere from credit unions to TANF programs I heard here, workforce boards, community colleges. We're trying to see where it fits in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay? So with that, I'd like to hand it over to John Rees from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And he's kind of the guy behind the screens that really puts all these tools together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for a very great introduction. Again, my name is John Rees. I'm a advisor with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Probably should have started with this, actually. Here's who everybody will be hearing from. So after I speak, we're also going to hear from Ruth about some of her experiences using the tool. And again, as Steve alluded to earlier, the following is just my sort of personal opinions and doesn't necessarily represent the perspective of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So again, why are we talking about this? In addition to sort of our mandate to focus on stable prices, the other mandate is for sort of maximum employment. And so one thing that we are focused on right now is a potential impediment to maximum employment is barriers to economic self-sufficiency, such as the benefits cliff. And so my initiative that I'm currently working on, this Advancing Careers for Low-Income Families, looks to identify these, develop tools and other research applications around issues such as the benefits cliff, and then engage partners such as yourself to look for solutions and to just increase, I think, broader awareness of this issue. Because as you'll see, I think it's pretty pervasive. Again, this is here just because it's not, some of my audiences are very familiar with this, others less so, but it's fundamentally about families who, may receive a wage increase or take on additional hours, and the money they receive gets more than offset by the loss of benefits as they cross some eligibility threshold. And there are plenty of stories about people, getting $1 or $2 wage increase and losing thousands of dollars worth of benefits. And we'll see later that is a real possibility. And again, I think most immediately, we obviously think of this being a disincentive for the worker, and it obviously is. But it also has pretty profound effects for potential employers and the government, right? Again, I think, if you're not in the world of workforce development, and I, just as an aside, come from the world of economic development, where I've been focused on for much of the last 15 years, joined the Fed in May, and I think, again, for audiences outside the room, it may seem like a niche affair, but when you actually sort of dig into this, it's incredibly widespread. The state of Alabama last year, we partnered with them to ask, have workers turn down a new job or a promotion because they were afraid of losing public assistance? 40% is a pretty substantial figure, particularly given sort of how incredibly tight the labor market is right now. We asked a similar question on employers last year in Florida. The Chamber of Commerce, our Florida Chamber, asked employers had they had workers turn down jobs because of this fear of experiencing a benefits cliff, and not quite as high as that Alabama figure, but still 1 in 3 businesses is not an insignificant number. And I was talking, actually I have a friend of mine who manages some Pizza Huts, and when I was telling him what I was working on, he was surprised. He was like, I'm constantly running into this problem. I didn't know if it was real or not, and I could sort of set him down and say, this is a very real issue, not only for the people who experience it, but I think it's also a really big issue because people change their behaviors for the fear of potentially losing it, because they don't know exactly where that line is, right? And so you may turn down that wage increase or that additional hours, and you would have been fine to actually accept that. But you don't necessarily know that, and as we often know, it can be a lot more difficult to regain the benefits you lost, whereas that, that wage increase or that additional hours might be temporary. And so it's not really worth the risk of pursuing it. And for governments, if someone transitions from being a recipient of public benefits to taking that higher paying job over time, that can have some pretty significant cumulative impacts on tax revenues, right? And this is just an example of Eagle County here going from an individual with 2 children going from a near minimum wage position to an LPN degree. Over their lifetime, they're expected to generate over $200,000 in additional state and federal taxes from doing that. And so everybody has an interest, because the benefits cliff generally, this is not always the case, creates an issue 5, 10 years, sort of, which again is not an insignificant period of time, but over longer horizons, a worker is almost always better off. And so how do we navigate that shorter time horizon so that they can enjoy the greater wages associated with that career trajectory? So again, I think this sort of underscores how pressing of a need to remove any disincentive for people to take on additional work right now. We're still near historically low unemployment rates. The labor force participation rate is still very low compared to a lot of historical trends. And workers are working less hours in a lot of instances. So against this backdrop, I think it started out as one tool and has now morphed into 4 tools. We have the Cliff Snapshot, the Dashboard, the Planner, and the Employer Edition. And I'm not going to present on all these today. I'm going to spend most of my time focused on the Dashboard. But just to give you a very brief overview of each of them, the Snapshot can sort of help you understand a point in time if you took on this additional hours of work or this wage increase. This was what might happen immediately to you. The tool on the far right is for the employer, right? Which someone earlier talked about how this increase of minimum wage is creating an issue for some people. Again, it really depends on your state and your household composition, but I would say in general, that wage level from about $17 to $22 an hour is often where we see that wage increase. And given the dearth of talent, you know, you're seeing a lot of jobs that never before paid $15, $17 an hour. That's now happening. I think a lot of people see that as an unalloyed boom for workers, not necessarily thinking of how it impacts this. And so I think it can be very helpful for employers to show, you know, employers are saying, I don't understand, I'm still not getting any applicants, I'm paying, you know, $17 an hour. We can walk them through and say, well, this is why. You know, if you move from $16 to $17 an hour, even if you're not experiencing a benefits cliff, that's an extra, let's say, $2,000 a year. They're going to lose $1,950 in benefits. And so there's just not a lot of incentive to make that move. So there's the Snapshot and the Employer Edition. We also have the Dashboard, which is, again, the one I'm going to show today, which combines issues around the benefits cliff and those calculations with a career component. So you can sort of see, by switching a career, what are the implications going to be over the long term. It incorporates a lot of local information based on things like the U.S. Census Bureau, and again, we'll see this in a second, that reflect issues like local cost of living and wages. But we also have a tool called the Cliff Planner. Instead of relying on sort of, you know, median averages for something like rent, we can actually have the individual put in what their actual rent is, so you get a little bit more detailed and granular portrait. I think the trade-off of that is it takes a little bit more time to walk someone through that than the Cliff Dashboard. There are sort of conceptually 4 broad tabs. The first one is going to be on your geography. The second one conceptually is your household demographics. The third is the public assistance that you currently receive. Thank you so much. Sure. And the fourth is this career change. So for today's example, and I apologize, I can't quite read that, but you would select the state, and then that'll allow you to select a drop down for today's example, Colorado. We're going to look at Eagle County. And that helps determine 2 things. One is the policies, particularly around things like public benefits that govern that jurisdiction, but it's also, again, going to drive a lot of issues around costs. So how much is housing, how much are utilities, how much is childcare? Because that is also very important, as we'll see. The second thing you're going to select is the household composition. Again, in this example, I'm selecting a worker who's 25 with 2 kids, ages 5 and 10, but there's a lot of flexibility on that. You can do multiple kids, 2 household families, and on and on. The next is the public benefits that the individual is currently receiving, and there are 3 options here. There are no benefits, You might ask, why do we include that? And that is because in this dashboard, we also, like I said, we have a career exploration component to it. And so you could just look at what is the impact of switching careers regardless of what happens to my benefits, which we've actually found has been kind of interesting. It's been very powerful to audiences like high school students, for example. We've been told that can be pretty powerful to not only show them the differing wages, but also just how expensive it is to live, which apparently is it came as a surprise to me, I'll say that, as someone who just recently had a kid. So you can select none, you can select all, which is possible but unlikely, as we all know, or you can select the specific ones that the individual is receiving. There are, I think, 14 programs on there. For today's example, I just selected the Earned Income Tax Credit, Section 8 Housing Voucher, Child Care, SNAP, and CHIP. That might necessarily not be the most sort of reflective, but it works pretty well for illustrative purposes. And so again, you can mix and match whatever programs the individual is receiving, and then you can pick the occupation that individual is considering exploring and compare that. Sort of the default comparison is a near minimum wage job, which for our purposes is a cashier, and the wages that are going to drive some of these subsequent charts you're going to see are based on the median hourly wage for a cashier in that community. So again, this would be Eagle County in Colorado.
Question here.
Shoot.
Yeah, I'm just curious if like Social Security benefits are included in those options, just because that's kind of like, I don't know, does this dashboard, can that like go through kind of like benefits canceling for people?
With the what?
For Social Security benefits?
For older individuals, no. But if you're on like SSI, we are incorporating that.
But SSI but not SSDI?
And we are incorporating that as well. I think that's actually just got launched last week. So if I was doing it live, so that's part of it. We are still working through some of that though, because it is enormously complex, as you all know. Because that also involves not just hourly wage, but things like asset test. And so we are still like working out, I think, all the kinks on that, because it's phenomenally complicated, and generally you're continuously checked on it. And so, as you'll see in a moment, actually, right, if we're projecting out things annually, that might not be the best framing. But, and I think this is very important, I'm only showing this tool, again, today. If someone wants to schedule a separate time to walk through it, I'm more than happy to do so. And this is not completely, we do not envision this right now at least as being like done. We are constantly sort of working on it and adding additional features. And so if you see something like you just mentioned that you would like to add, please let us know, because we are certainly open to it. But again, for today's purposes, we're going to try to keep it somewhat simple and just have 4 programs. And then when you do select the LPN, it will ask you how long, you can either select the default anticipated time to get that education credential, or you could enter in a custom value if you know that there's a specific program locally. Let's say there's an accelerated LPN. But again, for today's purposes, we're going to keep it simple and just select typical educational requirements for an LPN position. It is then going to spit out a bunch of charts if we're doing this live that would be sort of horizontally oriented. But the first one, I think, at least for me, is historically what we've thought of when we think about making a career transition, right? And so that top dark sort of maroon line, again, I'm colorblind, so I apologize. I think that's maroon, might look black, is that LPN position. That sort of marigold color is that near minimum wage job. And that dotted gray line is what we call the self-sufficiency target. And that's how much money we think your household needs sort of just to get by, right? That includes utilities, housing, transportation, childcare, based on that demographic information you just gave us with 5 and a 10-year-old child. And as you see that first year as the LPN, you're actually worse off, and that's because we assume as you're going to school, you can only work part-time, and you're actually working a near minimum wage job. But I think, again, to me, this is historically kind of how we've envisioned this trade-off, is that, yeah, there's a lot of pain in that first year, but by year 2, you're significantly better off. You're making roughly twice as much as you were in that near minimum wage job. And so if we can just figure out how to address that year 1 problem, we're all good. But I think that is not a particularly nuanced view of an individual situation. And the reason is because it doesn't account for an individual's family or household's annual net financial resources, which is not just income necessarily, but it's also public assistance, expenses, and taxes. And once you make that calculation, you get a very different portrait, right? So you take income, we add public assistance minus expenses and taxes. This shows those public benefits from those two different scenarios. So you can see on the left, again, that first year the individual is in school, only working part-time and making very little money. They actually qualify for a lot of benefits, but those taper off pretty dramatically. Whereas in that near minimum wage position, they're receiving not insignificant amount of benefits for many years. And once you add that into those wage calculations, you get a very different picture, right? You're no longer twice off as well. You are somewhat better off, but you're still below that dotted line, which is that self-sufficiency level, right? We have to talk about the sort of benefits, and benefits cliff, and I don't mean to dismiss that because it can be very significant. You see sort of one immediately here. But there's also the phenomenon we talk about, it's just a benefits plateau, where you're not necessarily worse off, but you're not getting ahead either. And that can be a pretty prolonged period of time. As you can see from here, I mean, we're talking, you've gotten your LPN degree in 2022, you did a little bit better in 2023, you go 7 or 8 years in the future, you're still not materially better off. It's only really when your kids get older, you no longer need childcare, you're now enjoying a higher wage, that you're really doing better financially. So again, I think this probably is a bit more nuance to an individual's situation.
And John, when you see that, you can kind of toggle back and forth with that previous slide to see which, in each year, why it's different, right? What you're losing.
Exactly, and so there's sort of a variety of use cases for this. I mean, we are doing these pilots, we're hearing some people, even if they can't figure out a mitigation strategy, find it helpful to just be aware of when they might run into this issue, just so they can sort of prepare for it. Other communities, organizations are looking at, are there policies that we can implement that would change some of this, right? So that it is a gradual off-ramp and we don't have these particularly cliffs, but also plateaus. We're also working in a community in Tennessee that is working with organizations like community foundations to see, can we intersect or intercede with individuals as they experience these cliffs and sort of backfill so they're not financially worse off? Can we come up with wraparound services, other philanthropic efforts to basically just mitigate the cliffs? So there's a pretty wide variety. And again, this is the dashboard. I feel like that's a ton of information. We're gonna have time for additional questions at the end. Any immediate questions?
Is this adjusted for inflation, especially when you compare inflation?
So we were actually talking about this before. It is not, and it is because generally speaking, and it's not necessarily true in specific shorter periods of time, let's say like right now, but in general, over time, wages have generally kept pace with inflation. And so we don't inflate the salaries, but we're also not inflating the expenses. So it generally cancels each other out. And one of the reasons for that is we've tried to make this to balance it being robust and comprehensive, but also relatively simple to read and understand. And we were afraid that if we start introducing other concepts and having to make additional calculations, that not only adds to the complexity from a computational standpoint, but also might just make it more confusing. Yes?
So each state has different rules around certain
Yes.
benefit programs. So does this take into consideration what those decrease in benefits would look like based on the state?
Yep.
I mean, that would make it kind of complicated on the back end, but.
So we basically have something called the PRD dashboard, which I'm not sharing today, but it is basically the engine that runs all this, and it's basically a massive database of all the rules. And so if I was showing this live, it would basically say, the Cliff dashboard / Colorado, right? Like there's a unique URL, although I think we're gonna maybe move to something that's the same for everybody from a website standpoint, but when you select your state, it is running the rules that govern your state.
And John, we also worked with the state of Colorado when this was first put together to not only, just look at what was written, but also had folks from different agencies to weigh in and review it first. So there was, live folks from the council and other agencies that have looked at this.
Yes, sir.
I know this is not what the point of this is, but could this tool be used in a reverse function? Like if you're meeting with somebody who was newly unemployed, you could talk about what benefits they could qualify for, or looking at if they have a downturn, what their impact could be?
I imagine so. And again, we try to sort of say this is sort of scenario planning, right? It's not an eligibility check, but yeah, I mean, it could be used for the reverse. So again, back sort of to your question, when you select that geographic component of it, and say you're in Eagle County, Colorado, the benefits are going to be calculated based on that jurisdiction. Again, all those costs are also based on representative data on things like childcare. And I only mention that to say the planner actually, it's a shorter time horizon. It's only 5 years, but it does allow you to say, you know what, like this is saying that the median child care cost is $700. That's really not sort of reflective of this individual's experience. It's $950, which that would also be a great deal, having just moved to Atlanta. And so you can actually put in some of those actual values and rerun it for a 5-year period so that it, but again, as I alluded to earlier, it just takes a little bit more time to walk through, but it provides you with additional granularity and gives just a more accurate view of their budget. I think we've kind of talked about some of the use cases. We've piloted this in over 90 communities, but we've actually had third-party evaluations on this that we didn't do. We had outside, like in Florida, for example, University of Florida looked at the initial deployment of this tool. In general, people have been pretty positive, both from the staff standpoint, generally speaking, between 70 and 80% of staff people say it has been helpful in some of their coaching sessions. Individuals have also reported that it's helpful. Again, even I think just knowing where that cliff is and what might be driving that is helpful for people. Obviously, I think ultimately we would like to have a pretty robust set of sort of mitigation strategies to help those individuals. But for now, I think just information and education, again, both from a policymaker standpoint, again, employer standpoint, helping them understand the effects of this. So I think I'm good on time. If anybody has any additional questions, wants to set up sort of one-on-one walk through some of this or some of those other tools, we also every Tuesday at the Atlanta Fed have kind of an open house where you can just jump on a Zoom call. We're there every Tuesday to ask if someone's like, well, I know how to use it, but I got this question and I didn't know how to answer it, for example, about something like inflation, or could I use it in this example? Or it'd be great. I ran into this situation where it just wasn't a good fit. Have you thought about doing X, Y, and Z differently? I don't want to sort of suggest that, again, this is like fully baked. We're open to additional revisions because we want it to be used and we want it to be helpful, ultimately. But now I want to share it with someone who can speak a little bit more about its application in Colorado.
All right, so I'm with Arapahoe Douglas Works. I work for the Employment First program, so that's dealing with individuals on SNAP. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how Arapahoe Douglas Works implemented this. I will be honest and say that the first round of implementation did not go well, but we've since worked out a lot of the kinks and are able to refer clients to it on a regular basis now. So to begin with, we started with our Colorado Works program, which is our TANF program, and we started with the population that was homeless within the TANF program. So we have a facility at our Oxford Vista location where individuals can go and receive housing. And so individuals who were there were referred to the Cliffs, to use the Cliffs tool. What I will say is that a lot of those individuals who were coming in were in crisis mode. We found out the tool is really hard for those individuals to use. You have to have a little bit of forward thought as far as maybe careers and different options down the line. And it was really hard for those individuals coming in that were in crisis mode to have that forward thinking and to be able to say, these are the types of jobs that I'm interested in. They were just interested in managing the crisis that they were in and getting out of their current situation into something that was more stable. So from that, we learned that a different customer base might be better to use this with. And so we switched over to using it in the Employment First program with individuals who were receiving SNAP benefits. We focused on 3 major populations, so those who were interested in training, those who were contemplating a career change, and those who were underskilled job seekers. So those who were interested in training, the tool was useful to be able to compare different, kind of give them that foresight of what might happen when they go to training and get that new job. So it was helping them plan out that future. Those who are contemplating a career change, the tool actually lets you look at different careers that you're able to go to in the future. So it was helpful to say, you know, you're thinking about this career, but maybe you want to think about the next step or a different career, because that's not going to get you to the level of self-sustainment. And so it was helpful to be able to talk through that with our clients. And then for those underskilled job seekers, you can put in, you know, if I potentially do go to this training, what would my new income level be and how will that impact my benefits? So it was really useful for us in that kind of career exploration piece. And those who were job seekers looking to get that job of, okay, what salary do I need to look for to be self-sustaining? And what job titles can I be looking for to be self-sustaining? That did not come without its own set of problems. So we did have an issue with initial staff buy-in. That was more due to kind of training errors on our program's part. And I think as the staff became more aware of how to use the tool and more comfortable and familiar with it, they did see more benefit in referring their customers and just were more comfortable in referring their customers to our career services department. So when we did implement the CLIF tool in our program, we referred our participants to our career services department, and they actually walked through the tool with the clients. So we were shorter staffed at the time, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. So we did have kind of tag teamed it with our career services department. The second would be customer buy-in, and along with that, them just sharing their information. A lot of customers can be reluctant to give you information about income or benefits that they're on. And if you don't put much into the tool, you're not going to get a lot of information out of it. So again, it's just talking through that with customers and getting to that comfort level with them. I think the more they know about the tool and the more they know why they're using it, the easier it was for us to use it with them. And then finally, the remote environment was a bit of a challenge for us. This tool does have a lot of charts that come out at the end. And so we were doing this over the phone with clients. And so it was a little bit harder to talk through some of those charts if you were on the phone versus even maybe a Zoom call or meeting with them in person. So I would recommend, if you're able to sit down and meet with them in person or at least do it over Zoom, that was much more useful, and I think the clients got more out of it. So that would be my recommendation, is the in-person or the Zoom as opposed to over the phone. But that was how we implemented at Arapahoe Douglas Works. I know that you guys across Colorado are all different and have different departments that you work with, different needs for your clients. So we definitely found the tool very useful and had a lot of good feedback from our clients. So it's something I would highly recommend implementing in your counties as well. So, and with that, I will open the floor up to any other questions that have come up.
Have you expanded its use to other populations?
We have not yet, so I think that's kind of our next step, especially now that we have it in our career services department, is opening it up to the WIOA side and different clients within the TANF population that are maybe more well suited to it.
So how uniform is the pay scale when you're reviewing customer and showing them this is what you could be making if you did this. And the reason I ask is I have an IT background, okay, but I work with disabled veterans now. And a lot of them go, hey Ron, I want to get into cyber because it pays so great. Well, you know, different industries, pay level is way different. So how accurate is that?
I would say that we didn't have any issues with accuracy inputting any of the information. You occasionally do get the job here and there where you're like, that doesn't quite look right as far as the pay scale goes, but most of them are accurate.
What kind of learning curve did you have for your staff?
That's a good question. So initially, we did like staff-led training within our team. Eventually, we reached out to the feds and asked for a little bit of help, and they gave us online modules that we were able to use, which were really convenient as far as training because you don't have to worry about getting your whole team together. They can complete it individually, and then at the end, maybe you can come and discuss any questions that they had. And I think that initially we didn't lean on the Federal Reserve enough and ask the deeper questions just because of where our staffing was at the time.
And we were working on sort of augmenting some of those so that resources so that you can just go online. There will be updated training modules and some other resources of sort of, I think eventually would have case studies and mitigation strategies to sort of allow you to just go to this one-stop shop and get all the resources you need. With that said, we are also happy to help lead some of that where it's needed.
I was going to mention that Arapahoe Douglas has been a great partner because a lot of they've uncovered some of these problems that have been mentioned and then allowed the program to respond to it. Around the training, for example, there are now these online modules that are self-paced. And so you can take your time, you can go back to them, go through them over and over, and then have conversations with staff around it, and found that, that's been useful. Also, this idea of suitability, it was a great learning experience where Arapahoe Douglas went through it with the homeless and realized this really wasn't the right tool for that population. And at that time, the Atlanta Fed did not have the snapshot tool. And that's now why that snapshot tool is there. It is for those folks that are in crisis. And so if you look at that suite, it's almost like a survive to thrive. You can kind of go deeper and deeper, and you match the tool. So that's pretty neat. So.
Ruth, thank you for spearheading this in Colorado with ADWorks. I'm just curious, to arrive at some of these outcomes, what were your data collection methods? What were these? Did you have several? Did you have one? Or how did you collect and track this?
So I will say, initially there was a spreadsheet that we had. Of course, everyone loves spreadsheets. And then we worked with Career Services to just kind of see the number of referrals that we were sending over. That is something I think we could improve, is the data tracking behind it, now that we've kind of got our footing as far as using it and our referral process over to Career Services, and kind of starting to collect some of that data to see, is there a higher success rate for those who go through training, or do they feel more prepared when they enter when they enter the workforce after their training and they do hit that benefits cliff. So there's definitely some room to collect better data, and we haven't fully dove into that yet. So.
Sorry, I don't usually ask. For the cliff planner, can you actually plug in, if they have a job that they've accepted or are contemplating, can you put in the actual pay that they are looking at, so it would really calculate? Okay,
awesome. Is this tool active? Can we use it today? Or how do we get about bringing this to our
So, reach out to me. I can give you my card afterwards. We typically ask you to sign a MOU with us, and really all that just formalizes that we're going to learn together, because we'd like to hear what your experiences is. Again, going back to that, how can we improve it? what's working, what can we make better. I will say we are not sort of actively bringing on a lot of new people this specific moment because we're putting our energies towards those online resources, as I said, creating those. We have some training modules, but we're expanding them to reflect all the tools we have. But we hope to start bringing on new partners, I would say early next year, December, February maybe. I'm sorry, January, February. With that said, if you have, some, urgency, come and talk to us, and we might be able to make exceptions to that. So yeah, just reach out, and we'll figure out a way to get you connected with the tool.
Yeah, and I think a great, I've really been impressed with all the questions. I mean, it's great, really cluing in. And I know I've seen these presentations, I'm giving these presentations 30 or 40 times. Every time you see it, there's something new you can dig out of it, depending on who you're working with and where you sit. And maybe for this group, if we could, maybe Susan, if we could organize, let's pick a day in November maybe, at some point. We can invite folks, we'll have a kind of a training, see who comes in. You'll all be invited. We can open it up to your colleagues and walk through it again. And then that'll be an intermediary step, and then see where we can go from there. And we can talk a little bit more about some of the resources. Would that kind of work? And that way we'd all be together and kind of continue to learn together and see how those partnerships could shake out. But yeah, the tool has been developed for Colorado, and the Workforce Council has an MOU, kind of master MOU, that's bringing together 3 of the areas. And I know Lee Berliner Wheeler is all excited about this, and ready to see how we can expand awareness of it to drive some work. That'd be great. Other questions or thoughts? Anything else to jump out at you? Yes.
I have a question. So, Ruth, thank you so much for bringing into ADWorks. We've had some customers that had very positive feedback. What are some of the things that customers like the most about the tool? At the end of the day, I know you get feedback from them about how it goes. How do they feel about the process? Do they feel included, or is it easy? I know there was a little bit of struggle at the beginning, the buy-in, but it seems like it's going successful. So what's the feedback?
I would say the biggest thing that they appreciate is just the knowledge that they gain from this, right? The kind of bigger picture that they're able to see, and being able to take that step back and not just look at, okay, like what is the next step, but what is the big picture? And then I know the biggest positive feedback that we've received is those who are looking at going into training, and just knowing when that benefits cliff will hit, and it's not a surprise as much to them anymore. I feel like there's a second part to your question. But.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That is perfect. No, I was just wondering, as they're going through the process, you coach them, do they ever come back after they've completed their training to let you know, hey, whatever you predicted was on point. I knew exactly that within 6 months I needed to get myself ready, my family financially ready for that next step. Do they ever come back with feedback, or they kind of keep it, and you obviously see them in your program as they're progressing?
I don't think that we've had the tool long enough and had it implemented long enough that we've had somebody come back and say, hey, it was predicted that in 6 to 9 months that would happen. But as we continue on with that, I think that's great to reach back out to the customers and see, how accurate do you feel that was? I know that both of you have been working with it a little bit longer, so you might be able to speak to some customers that have.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just to echo that, is that it gives people a clarity of where that cliff is. We think about there being the cliff, and oftentimes we think, well, people know exactly where it is and they're playing that margin, right? But it's like a cliff that's buried in a fog. And it's such a dramatic drop, people are afraid to get close. So they kind of leave some opportunity on the table. And this helps to kind of remove that fog and allow people to see where they can go. Another piece, a lot of folks don't think about the effect of their children. There's a lot of programs, that free and reduced lunch, CHIP, these things. Their kids are going to age out. There's nothing they can do about that in terms of income. What will effect that have on them? So it's very complicated. It kind of fits into that. And it is new, so we are starting to hear some of those stories about people coming back. What's been more surprising for me is the stories that you hear when people talk about the problems. Like I've heard in Oklahoma, verifiable examples of people that have gotten divorces, you know, to get around the benefit cliff. I mean, that is just unintended consequence, you know. And that takes it to the next level. All of this conversation has primarily been about how to use it with clients, but also this is being used to change policy. And so some states have looked and said, what if we change the eligibility requirement from 22,000 to 26,000? What would that do in terms of child care, right? And being able to model it out and policymakers making change around that. And so that's another place this can go in Colorado.
We actually have a fifth tool that I haven't talked about today for guaranteed income programs. To kind of get to that point too, is that a lot of cities and some states over the last couple of years have implemented pilots, and we want them to understand and the recipients to understand how that could potentially be offset, because that's like just getting a massive raise basically if it's treated as a gift. And so that's another instance where we've used it to highlight sort of unintended consequences of policy decisions.
Just a comment. One, this is a really cool tool, and two, this is a pitch for your last session, which is if you go into My Colorado Journey, you can actually get to this tool in your account, but only to the dashboard. Correct. So you want to try it out.
MyColoradoJourney.com.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll plan another kind of training around this, kind of go a little deeper into the tool, maybe show the financial planner as well a little bit. That's great for kind of that financial education, financial coaching piece that is a key part of your work as well, and kind of see where we can go. And it's great that I think I completely forgot about it being integrated into that other portal. Yeah, so I mean, it's institutionalized, right? Can't beat that.
So I handed out some business cards that I had. If you still need one, I'll see if I have some more. I wanted to see if anybody did not mark themselves as attending this session in the app, if you could please do so that I can pull us back together and bring Steve and John in for additional work sessions. That would be helpful so I know who was here. Any other last chance for questions?
Thanks. I know all three of us are in the HUVA. If you can figure out how that works, feel free to contact us. Looking forward to it. I made my first connection today through it, I believe, with Holly. So, yeah, please contact us, and John and I will be out to Colorado anytime. Especially, yeah. Thanks so much.